Good evening, everyone. My name is Martin Daughtry. I am an assistant professor of music at NYU in New York, on loan to NYU Abu Dhabi for the 2010-2011 academic year, spending the best academic year of my life here in Abu Dhabi, and it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce you to the two scholars who are going to be giving a panel presentation this evening, and to welcome you and thank you for coming out and being our intrepid audience here on a Thursday. So tonight's panel is dedicated to women's voices in the Muslim world. It will involve two presentations, each of which describes a different entry of women into vocal genres that for the entire length of their history have been overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, male. The presentations take, they kind of chart out two different peripheries of the Muslim world, one Indonesia and one Kazakhstan. We will have, our first presenter will be Anne Rasmussen, professor from the College of William and Mary. She will be followed by our own dear Professor Walter Feldman of NYU Abu Dhabi. At this point, I should say we are very sad to announce that Professor Inna Naroditskaya, a good friend from Northwestern University, was unable to come. She had a sudden illness in the family. So if you have no objections, I'd like to tell her that we all send our best regards and hope for a speedy recovery to Ina. The implications of Ina's absence, aside from the negative implications, are that our presenters will be able to relax and give, not worry about time constraints. You will have more time for questions, and we will all have more time for noshing, eating, and drinking out in the lobby afterwards. So everyone relax and get ready to enjoy the two presentations that are about to unfold before you. Anne Rasmussen is Associate Professor of Music and Ethnomusicology at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, where she also directs the William and Mary Middle Eastern Music Ensemble. In the not-so-distant past, Anne has served as chair of the Middle East Studies faculty at William and Mary and co-director of the Asian Studies Initiative there. Her research interests and publications concern American musical multiculturalism, particularly Arab American music and community, music and culture in the Middle East, and Islamic musical arts in Indonesia. Anne's new book, brand new, right? Still steaming from the presses, is called Women's Voices, The Recited Quran and Islamic Musical Arts in Indonesia, which was put out by the University of California Press. No, that's not your newest book. That's her book. That's her new single-authored book. She'll explain this. She is also, though, co-editor with Kip Lornell of Musics of Multicultural America, which came out in '97, and of a brand new collection. This is the one that is just so new as to be practically not there at all. It's just appeared, right? 3 days ago. So a round of applause for the appearance of a new piece of scholarship. This collection is entitled Music and Islam in Indonesia, and it was co-edited with David Harnish. This year, Anne has a research fellowship from the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center in Oman to undertake an ethnographic study of musical patronage and culture in the Arabian Gulf nation of Oman. So I believe the time has come for Anne to join us on the stage. Thank you, Anne, for traveling so far to come and talk to us.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I would tell you to move down so you can see the screen, but there are multiple screens for you to view, so that's a bit different. I was just, I bring greetings from New York. I was just at NYU main campus, Astor Place, about exactly 1 week ago today, less than 1 week ago today, last Friday, for another conference. So it's delightful to be here. The idea was that I would find a place to put my papers. Let's see, how about that? The idea was that I would come up here to Abu Dhabi when I was doing work in Oman. I've made 2 trips there. That didn't quite work out, so I had to come from the East Coast, and I thank you very, very much, NYU Abu Dhabi, for inviting me and for all the hospitality here so far, and it's a great honor to be on a panel with Zev Feldman and to be here with Martin and hear about the best year of his academic life. And I'm going to watch you go downhill from here, Martin. At every conference, you're going to look grayer, but I'm going to hold out hope. At any rate, thank you very much. So the title of my presentation today is Language as Power, Performance as Intention. That's up there? Okay, Women's Islam in Indonesia. And I do have a paper that I'm going to read, but I'm also going to riff a little bit on the side. And I've got some audio and also some video clips to show you, and a few other video clips, so if there is time at the end, we can have a look at those. You'll just have to yell out whether or not you're interested. But just so you know, I guess this was sort of in Martin's introduction, but my work has been, I didn't just arrive in Indonesia by a divine intervention or because I woke up and said that's the only place I ever want to do work. Really, my first work was among Arab Americans, so I was sort of trained in Middle Eastern studies and music, and my dissertation and about 10 years of research after that dealt with music and community among Arab Americans. I've also dealt with Arab musical aesthetics and culture through teaching, performance, and scholarship, and advocacy as an activist ethnomusicologist. Then finally, I went to Indonesia, and I knew I couldn't catch up with the Indonesianists there studying gamelan and the beautiful Hindu-Buddhist traditions of the court and the palaces. But I heard Arabic everywhere I went. My ears were very alive to what was going on in Arabic, namely the religious sounded music culture there. And so I began to hang out with people in the business of religion and religious music, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And then finally, bringing 2 of these projects to completion just this year, the timing would have it that I had a sabbatical this year, and I was interested to do some work on the top part of the Indian Ocean, where these roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, of Islamic culture and practice came to Indonesia from. And I was originally interested in going to Yemen. That was not possible for political reasons. I was not allowed to go to Yemen. So I looked at the map, and Oman was right next to Yemen, and there was a wonderful grant available, and I said, well, I'll give it a try. So just so you know, this is a CD that I did, The Greatest Hits of the Arab American Community, which led me to working in the whole area of musics of multicultural America. And then I'll talk a little bit about my mentor. I'm very grateful that he taught me to play the instrument called the oud. It's been instrumental to my fieldwork methodology, both in my dissertation research, and it continues to propel my work as an educator. The ensemble that I teach attracts a real diversity of students. It's an important component of the International Relations and Global Studies program, and it makes a pretty big statement at a place like the College of William and Mary, which I guess is the first or second oldest after Harvard university in the United States, a place where we celebrate colonialism. So to have a music ensemble like this does make a statement. It's also really a forum into which to invite performers and scholars from a wide variety of traditions. So it's not an ensemble that strives for perfection, but really just another forum beyond the classroom, beyond lectures and reading to learn about this part of the world. Since about 10 years ago, we are teaching Middle Eastern studies and Islamic culture in times of war. This is also a very interesting position to be in at a time when stereotypes run rampant, but when the curiosity about the Middle East and about the Muslim world is about as high as it's ever been. And so being, as an outsider, being a representative of that culture and that religion, puts me in a very interesting position. beyond that, as Martin just mentioned, about 10 years of work in Indonesia really culminated in these two publications. When it rains, it pours. This has never happened to me in my entire life. So Martin, you may find that sweet spot yet down the road there. But finally, I'm done with these two huge projects. And you can get each of them on Amazon for less than 25 bucks. So there you go. I don't know if Amazon can find Abu Dhabi. And then finally, following Indonesia, this new project in Oman. You don't need to know that that's the Arabian Gulf nation just next door because you live here. But most people, some people might need a little geographical assistance. And I finally structured my grant, my fellowship work around 3 events. The spectacular events of National Day, which was the 40th anniversary of the modern nation of the Sultanate of Oman, and was there in November and December. And then in February, I went for the Muscat Festival, and then I'll be back for the Mahrajan al-Kharif in the southern part of Salalah. And I'd like to recognize my colleague, Dr. Majid al-Harthi, who came all the way from Muscat just to hobnob with some ethnomusicologists. He's been extraordinarily helpful and hospitable, in spite of the fact that he had absolutely no choice that I was going to show up on his doorstep. All right, here's one of my teachers, and I'd like to start with a little performance to wake you up and to cancel out that R&B music that we were hearing before. Ara tayran ala ghusni yunadi atat bushra limajruhi fuadi بدت ليلا فادها شيقوها بدت ليلا فادها شيقوها ركن سجدا في كل وادي. When I initially heard this tawshih in the context of a class at the Institute Ilm al-Qur'an, it was literally music to my ears. This melodic line and my ability to conceptualize its movement through time in terms of both its intervallic content and its ambitus and its progression through this melodic mode called maqam saba caused my hair to stand on end. It still does. And I usually don't have a microphone, so I can belt it out pretty loud. And to be in a room with everybody singing at the top of their lungs, these songs that were used to learn the melodies that were then applied to people learning to recite the Quran was an incredibly powerful experience. This is my teacher, Pak Mursid Kori Indra. My relationships with the many consultants for my book, Women, the Recited Quran, and Islamic Music in Indonesia, were more often than not facilitated by a mutual involvement in Arab music. In my research process, musical performance constituted one of the strongest sites of meaningful exchange. Learning through listening and then hearing made up for the inadequacies of the linguistic sophistication I possessed, either in Indonesian or Arabic. This language of aesthetic and intellectual prestige that all of this performance was about. In studying qira'ah, the performative, melodic, mujawid style of Quranic recitation, the intensity of the experience was almost overwhelming. To practice channeling the word of God through the body with a language that is thought to be so beautiful that it could only come from a divine source was profound. I often felt that I played the part of an enfant sauvage, the wild child who has special needs and disabilities, but whose senses are also heightened, intensified, and ultra-perceptive. And New York University professor Deborah Kapshin, with whom I was with last week, talks about literacies of listening. And she asks, can we acquire the ability to learn other cultures through participating in their sound economies, right? So just through listening, can we learn how to be literate in other cultures? And I guess the answer is yes, but you do have to know a little bit about what you're listening to. And that's a little bit what this paper is about. I try to convey the experience of tarab, or musical ecstasy, also translated as enchantment or rapture, right? This Arabic word tarab. I try to convey the experience of tarab, musical ecstasy, in my description of the many scenarios that make up my ethnography. It unfolded, for example, during an evening when 2 champion reciters invited me to Medan in Sumatra, and they brought me to a hafla al-Qur'an, literally a Qur'an party. At this event, alternation between Qur'anic recitation and singing among men and women was replete with communal ecstatic indulgence. People were really into it. That we listened to cassettes of Kulthum. A show of hands, Kulthum, does this mean anything? Oh, wonderful, okay. That we listened to cassettes of Kulthum during the hour drive in both directions only enhanced this musical road trip. Kulthum is the legendary singer from Egypt, known throughout the Arab world, but also known throughout the Muslim world. So here I am with these very well-known reciters in Indonesia, you know, singing at the top of our lungs to cassettes of Kulthum. When reciters, men, women, professionals and amateurs, consistently show interest in musical performance and collaborations with me, their enthusiasm for what musicologist Christopher Small calls musicking is clear. Many instances in the research process help to confirm that for many reciters, a seamless flow from recitation to singing to music and back again is the norm and not the exception. So here are a couple of slides. This is the main reciter that I work with, and we'll see some video footage of hers. This is at the Pondok Pesantren, or the religious boarding school called Tebu Ireng in East Java. For those of you who follow Indonesian politics, the man who was elected president in the first democratically held presidential elections in 2000, let's see, not in 2004, in 1999 when I was there, Gus Dur, Abdurrahman Wahid. His grandfather founded this Pondok Pesantren. Pondok comes from the Arabic word funduk, hotel. This is really thought to be the sort of heart, the roots, the heart of Indonesian Islam in East Java. And we're there for an event, but as what often happened is reciters would say, oh, here's Ibu Ann with her oud. Let's get some songs together and we can perform. And so in rehearsals that lasted anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 days, all of a sudden I'd find myself on stage totally winging it, mostly winging it, with reciters, men, women, children, and so forth. So the idea here is performing in the field, but also the idea that for reciters, recitation to singing to music and back again. This is in Indonesia, in Jakarta in January 2010, just a little more than a year ago. And Maria Ulfa and her husband, who's not in the business of religion, he's a lung specialist. They also have a small pesantren, a small boarding school. And these aren't necessarily what you read about or what I read about in the New York Times. In her case, she has a wide range of ages that live there, of students who want to study recitation with her, this melodic style of recitation. And they decide, but during the day they go to school, they have jobs, they do other things. They're not exclusively studying religion. And so up on the right-hand side, you see all of the various genres of religious music that were performed at this Pagelaran Seni Islami. And one of the great things about doing work in Indonesia is they always have what this is called a spanduk. And this is a handmade one, but it will be a big banner that says what the event is, who it's for, what the date is. So you can literally sort of look back, you can kind of scribble it down in your notes, or look back at your photographs and say, oh yeah, that's what it was. So this is the Pagelaran Seni Islami oleh Profesor Dr. Anneke Rasmussen, that's me, dari Amerika Serikat, hosted by the Institute Ilmul Quran. So they thought this would be a good idea to put on this exhibition of Islamic arts. one of the groups that performed. These are all young women who study, college-age women, who study at the Institute Ilm al-Quran, an institute for Quranic studies. And this is something that they do, one of the music genres that they play. It's called Hajr Marawis, and I'm actually looking for some roots of this kind of performance because not only the instruments themselves we find in places like Yemen and Oman, but also the very interlocking style of playing. And I've brought along a few clips of this if you're interested. It's a young man's Hajr Marawis group. On the more professional level, Kiai Kanjeng, a fabulous ensemble that combines both a lot of Islamic chanting and singing, also combined with popular music. You see instruments of the Indonesian gamelan here, but then also electric guitar. I think there's a drum set, keyboard, and so forth. Emha Ainu Najib, the director of this, is one of the most prominent social activists. He's a literati, a poet, a storyteller, definitely someone to look up if you travel to Indonesia. His wife, Novia Kolopaking, is also an important person in that group and in the arts scene and kind of the scene of social activism through arts. Simultaneously, and to complement my musical experiences, the entire soundscape became a close consultant. Hearing Islam in Indonesia is not an option, it is a certainty. Architecture in Indonesia, even in Jakarta, is porous, and neighborhoods are accessible and penetrable. And because even the smallest group will amplify their activities, pushing them into the public space, often with distorted amplification, my access to, or at least observation of innumerable contexts was enabled through orality. I could often hear where I could not go, and as I learned more about the sound sources of Islamic Indonesia, I was more able to accurately guess at the biographies of the sounds I heard. The insight, or more accurately, in-here, into religious and social life that such a permeable physical environment offered turned my ears into cognitive organs that invited me to reach beyond the noise. Through hearing practices, I was able to, as ethnomusicologist Veit Erlman writes, and this is Erlman's words, I was able to conceptualize new ways of knowing in a culture and of gaining a deepened understanding of how the members of a society know each other. Okay, so I haven't experienced the same thing here, but Indonesia is extremely noisy, and you're just processing all this stuff from mosques, from shopping malls. If a women's study group gets together and studies, they will often be an amplifier right there in the living room, so the whole neighborhood knows. When I was practicing recitation, when I was practicing Javanese drumming, the entire street knew what I was doing. So this is difficult. This is something to get used to from a Western perspective where we don't allow, boom boxes on public transportation, and we have soundproof practice rooms, and we have noise, legislation all over the place. And so then to repeat from Erlman, I was able to conceptualize new ways of knowing in a culture and of gaining a deepened understanding of how the members of society know each other as I became more tuned in to these various sources of noise, often which I could hear but I couldn't see. The voices of women are one of the distinctive strains in the Islamic soundscape, and as they perform, teach, study together, and practice alone, women contribute to the creation of messages of great beauty, power, and potency. They not only have access to the divine, but they also help to create it, both for themselves and for others. Their voices, loud, strident, and authoritative, are heard by all and often emulated, even by men. Of the many distinctive features of Indonesian Islam, the role of women as reciters, who were also involved in a range of Islamic musical arts, what they call seni musik Islam, was often identified to me as paramount and among the most salient features of both the continuous localization of Islam in Southeast Asia, as well as the Islamization of the Indonesian Muslim ecumen. So just to show, these are some slides of young children who their talent is identified. They begin competing in organized competitions that range from this was just a local children's festival to national festivals of great proportion. And if we look at, so what might be some of the roots? What might lay fertile ground for the overwhelming involvement of women in religious Islamic culture in Indonesia? And if we look at writing in general about Indonesia, I just pulled out a couple of quotes, one from Barbara Ramazak from her book, Women in Asia. So many sources on women in Southeast Asia comment on their relatively high social position, their economic autonomy, the veneration of fertility in indigenous religion, and bilateral kinship systems in which descent and property may pass through both family lines. And then looking at Barbara Andaya's work, she writes, from the early 15th and 16th centuries, the advance of Islam and Christianity in island Southeast Asia introduced new articulations of messages stressing female spiritual and intellectual weakness. Across the region, it is possible to document the ways in which women were excluded from the most prestigious areas of religious praxis. This issue is especially pertinent to Southeast Asian societies because in many areas, women and sexually ambiguous individuals played a leading role in indigenous rituals and in communication with the spirit world. For the most part, Islamic expansion in Southeast Asia underwrites a narrative of amicable localization rather than abrupt change and dislocation. So I think what she's saying that in spite of the arrival of the monotheistic religions, which tend to diminish women's participation, that as Indonesia Islamizes and as Islam is indigenized or localized or Indonesianized, that place for women remains. In channeling the word of God through the human body, Qur'anic reciters, women or men, activate the Sufi objective of inner spirituality, the melding of the mundane and the sublime towards a personal experience of the divine. While the objective is to recreate the archetypal, the result is unapologetically personal, as the voice, more than any other performing apparatus, is always identified as belonging to a particular body. So when your mother calls you on the phone, she doesn't have to say, hi, this is mom, right? You know from hi. Even before we had cell phones that said mom, right? We recognize voice, we're flipping through the radio station, right? And we could say that we recognize the style of Miles Davis trumpet playing as opposed to, say, a Louis Armstrong, right? Those of us who are connoisseurs would recognize those particular stylistic differences. But the voice is really never. And I'm going to have a long conversation with Martin about this because he teaches a whole class on voice, I've just discovered. I would argue very difficult to completely detach from the body. And if we know that voice, that body is a part of that cognitive experience of processing the sound. Although it may be represented as a solo and individual act, the performance of language in an Islamic context is actually a communal endeavor. First, the performer of Quranic recitation or devotional song or something like the call to prayer is doing something that everyone or that many people have practiced and experienced. Second, reception of language performance by listeners, and here the Arabic word is sami'a, from the verb sam, to listen. The reception of language performance by listeners, sami'a, is as much a part of the aesthetic complex, both in idea and action, as is performance. Active listening often involves physical and sounded behavior. So if we look at another one of our New York colleagues, I'm making these people nostalgic for home. Jonathan Shannon writes about this, I think, quite well in his book Among the Jasmine Trees, which describes music in Syria. And the idea of aesthetic concepts and discourses are themselves performative. That is, they participate in the constitution of the context and performance situations in which they emerge and do not merely reflect them. So aesthetic ideas, the way we talk about music, and the way that we show that we like music, our behavior in a particular concert setting or in a particular setting where people make music. So let's just listen now, take a break from me, and listen to actually a male reciter, and then a little later, in a couple of minutes, we'll listen to Ibu Maria Olfa. This is one of the most famous reciters in Indonesia, Muammar Zed'a. We're at the Islamic Center in Jakarta. Vast, 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 enormous, enormous space. So there are probably 4,000 people there. You know what? Let's go back. Okay, and it's going to start very quietly. And you may have to adjust the volume. It starts quiet, but then you may have to turn it down. Okay, so you get the idea, except in real life, it's much, much louder than that. One, because of the use of amplification, and also because even without amplification, reciters are really performing at the top of both their range and their volume. Now, what I could say about his particular recitation style, first of all, this long phrase that he did, he's known for this super long breath that he has. And this single breath phrase is an archetypal aesthetic both in Qur'anic recitation but also in Arabic singing. The long, long, long spun out phrase without breath at all. Another thing, you hear this kind of sobbing, chopping ornament that he does, this it's imitated by especially by male and female reciters. But when preparing to go to a competition, the Indonesian reciters will say, well, don't do that if you go out of the country. If you're in the international thing, don't do these special things because, you know, the people from, other countries won't appreciate it. So a lot of my work deals with the fact that there are all these rules, tajweed, and all of these ways in which the Quran is taught to ensure that it doesn't, so you don't merusakkan ma'na, so you don't break the meaning of it. Yet there is all of this individualism, including the particular talent and virtuosity of an individual man or woman. Good, okay. In Arab performance aesthetics, reception, so you hear all these people sort of bursting in there. I mean, they're right with him. They're waiting for. Another thing he does is he, to enhance his volume, he'll do like this, and as he's singing, as he's on this note, of course you don't say singing, as he's reciting, he'll pull the mic way away like that. And then he'll bring it back, so he gets this very dramatic fade. At any rate. And then you hear the audience is right with him. In Arab performance aesthetics, reception is a crucial component of performance. Virginia Danielson remarks that the musical authorities of early 19th century Cairo all count audience, this early 19th century Cairo, they all count audience as among one of 3 to 5 components of music. The others generally, including text, melody, rendition, and in the case of instrumental music, composition and accompaniment. She acknowledges furthermore that although the lineage of these ideas is tenuous, the notion that the performer and audience constitute a feedback loop, and that idea is also brought out by Ali Jihad Rasi, another scholar in the field, is an ideology and practice with deep historical roots. So in other words, music doesn't happen without audience, and these things are absolutely one and the same, and we can look at all of these musical authorities writing about music, including audience, that include audience as part of the, as part and parcel of the whole package. As elsewhere in the Islamic world, the Muslim soundscape in Indonesia is difficult to legislate because it both represents and activates the intersection of hearing, knowledge, piety, and power through individual and collective experience. Through a national competition system, however, banks of judges, ranking criteria, and a point system scientifically distill the experience of recitation into an objectively measurable act. So now we turn to the national competition. The Musabaqa Tilawat al-Qur'an, or MTQ, is an impressive demonstration of the festivalization of religion. An exercise in nationalism, the MTQ celebrates the diversity of Indonesia under the umbrella of Islamic unity and tolerance, including religious tolerance. The event's Olympian production is overseen by its own department within the National Ministry of Religion, which is called the Institute for the Development of Qur'anic Recitation, Lembaga Pengembangan Tilawat al-Qur'an, or LPTQ. As stipulated in the National Planning Guide, 18 ongoing competitions take place during the week-long festival. These include recitation by male and female adults, recitation by male and female teenagers, children, and the blind. Calligraphy is another category, contests in the 7 styles or dialects of reading, and memorization. The colorful and celebratory nature of the event is impressive, as is the fact that 50% of the contestants in all categories are female, 50%. With its attention to hierarchical judging and material reward, the state-sponsored competition may inadvertently control the inherently mystical aspect of internalizing and collectively experiencing God's word. In the context of competitions, the performance act is rigidly prescribed. It seems as though contestants, both male and female, are concentrating so hard on producing a flawless recitation that any showmanship they might be able to muster or involuntarily display takes a back seat to the technical aspects of their recitation. Furthermore, because they are being judged on adat, or proper behavior, including the way they are dressed, the way they enter and exit the stage, and the way they carry and place the Quran on its stand, a contestant will minimize any extraneous physical action or emotional display. So here are a couple of slides. Let's just look at this. A picture is worth a million words. So don't look at your screens, look at my screen. So here we have Seleksi Tilawat al-Quran. This is in 1999. So this is just to select people who will go on to the international competitions that are held all around the Muslim or Islamic world. Man and woman sitting next to each other. This Arabic writing, any Arabic writing in Indonesia is thought of as spiritual, holy, religious, even if it's the title of a popular song, just having that there looks religious. This is the Masjid Istiqlal, the giant national mosque, which is in downtown Jakarta. This is the Monas, the Monument Nasional, this big tower, and you can climb up and look around. And this is a little Betawi man. Betawi is one of the ethnic groups in Jakarta. Of course, Indonesia is an extraordinarily complex place ethnically with hundreds of languages and different groups. So it captures quite a number of nice symbols of nationalism and religion right there. This is from one of the competitions in Kalimantan in 2004, Palangkaraya. It took me, I got to go on the airplane with the Minister of Religious Affairs and his delegation, which was great because I got to go the day before. But they were saying, oh, Harimin Lima, Harimin Enam. And I'm saying, what does that mean? And they were saying, the day -6. So it took 6 or 7 days just to fly everybody into Kalimantan and then 6 or 7 days to get everybody out. Thousands of people come, buildings are built, this beautiful pavilion was built just for the event. These events are peppered with musical performance. This was the opening parade, and there were probably 7 or 8 marching bands, including marching bands from some churches that performed, floats from every province. So you're wondering, is this a national festival? Is it a festival? Is it a multicultural festival? Is it a religious festival? It's all of those things. Here's the tower where the reciter recites. See, there he is. Whoops, yeah. Oh, wait, let me move that arrow. That's a little distracting. There we go. So here he is. You can see, if you can see this man with his little hat down there in this glass tower, quite extravagant. Now, the judges are sequestered backstage, just like in the auditions for the Metropolitan Opera. You do not see the person that you're judging. They sit backstage, and this man is judging lagu dan suara, voice and tune and voice, lagu dan suara. And other people would be judging breath control. Some people would be judging the number of maqam or musical modes that were used in the recitation. Other people would be judging issues of comportment and giving numerical scores and adding them up and so forth. Now, again, the idea that these people, these primary judges in Indonesia, also train the best reciters. So the idea that with a pair of headphones, you would not actually recognize these voices, even if you're not seeing them, is something that, of course, is questionable. They all recognize the voices of the best reciters, and they follow these reciters beginning when they're children. Here's another, not a great photograph, but you can see the judges behind their glass case with their headphones on. There's an even worse picture, but a good close-up. And this is a less formal event in the afternoon with some teenagers, and these judges are just separated by wooden things. And that's not so, they actually can see the contestant, but that's just so they can't cheat and look at the other people's scores. Good. Although President Suharto supported Islamic cultural, this is on censorship and control. Although President Suharto supported Islamic cultural practice in lieu of implementing Islamic political or legal policies, his government did not encourage all forms of Islamic practice. Moving from the audio to the visual for a moment, we must consider that prior to Suharto's government and through most of his presidency, it was illegal for girls and women to cover their heads with a scarf, or jilbab, the Indonesian word for the Arabic hijab, and either in school or in civic workplaces. The government's prohibition was a clear signal that this simple practice was interpreted as deviant and resistant to norms of civility. Because of overwhelming social pressure, Suharto's government finally lifted the ban in 1990 with a Surat Keputusan, an official letter of decision, that permitted public school students and public servants to wear head coverings. At the time of my research, however, many private establishments and even some institutions affiliated with the government still discouraged or prohibited the use of the jilbab. Although Westerners might see this kind of legislation as a constructive move that protects its citizens by containing fundamentalism and the abuse of women by radically religious fathers, brothers, and husbands, it's important to note that such state-mandated policies may be interpreted as equally coercive by women who are fed up with the pressure to eschew resistance in favor of service to the nation. Both scholars Muallim, Mina Muallim, and Suzanne Brenner, scholars of Muslim women in the Iranian and Indonesian context respectively, posit that a woman's choice to wear Muslim fashion should never be interpreted as a sign of passive religiosity, but as a politically charged move that signals Muslim women's choice of membership, complicity, and agency. If that which is seen can be activated and interpreted as a statement of resistance to the powers of the state, why not that which is heard? Unlike the state-sponsored competitions and televised festivals, Islamic noise from local communities is difficult to contain and control, both in principle and in practice. Much of this noise, the singing of salawat, or songs in praise of the Prophet Muhammad, the playing of rabbana, these big frame drums that one often hears coming from mosque complexes, the long sermons that are broadcast on Friday afternoons, the early morning women's gatherings during Ramadan, and of course the regular call to prayer and the recitation, formulaic prayers, and chanting, wirid and zikr, that precede and follow it, All of this is, after all, the Word of God, or at least it relates to God and His prophet. The sonic footprint of small communities and their ability to circulate words and deeds of potency and power to their members are crucial alternatives to the heavy hand, first of the guided democracy of Suharto, and since the late 1990s, of the dynamic and sometimes haphazard democracy of Reformasi, or Reformation. Regarded positively, the same distortion that is offensive to the insensitive, unhearing, and unknowing ear can represent power, presence, and, as Robert Walzer writes on heavy metal music, potency. While it may seem blasphemous to draw analogies between heavy metal music and the sounds of religious worship and performance, I suggest that presence, power, and potency are at the core of the Islamic soundscape, whether heard as a single beautiful voice wafting across the valley or as a collision of the collective in an urban intersection. Furthermore, these concepts are embodied in the Asian aesthetic of ramai, busy noisiness, as well as the Islamic valuation of hearing as knowing and of listening with the heart. The phenomenon of ramai, R-A-M-A-I is how you would pronounce this, translated as busy noisiness, that we find throughout the region and in parts of mainland East Asia as well, both paves the way for and aggrandizes the orality of Arab Islam, reminding participants continually of the power of the language and the knowledge that is contained within and through it. Owing not to Muslimness, but to Southeast Asianness, noisy commotion chases away bad spirits and reinforces patterns of communal living and groupiness that, although not unique to the region, are certainly characteristic of it. That orality is a fundamental aspect of Muslim cultures, both historically and in contemporary times, is a premise that may be difficult for people conditioned by the prestige of literacy to grasp, and I am one of those conditioned by the prestige of literacy. Charles Hirschkind helps us to understand the importance of orality by juxtaposing the logocentric process of persuasion by argument, I guess that's what I'm trying to do, with hearing with the heart. So here's a quote from Charles Hirschkind, who works in Egypt among speakers, preachers, I guess, for a better word, imam. Here we go. That Muslim scholars have been relatively uninterested in elaborating an art of persuasive speaking owes in part to the way revelation affected their conceptions of the efficacy of speech. The message itself has been articulated in the most perfect of possible forms, the Qur'an. This is made evident in many parts of the Qur'an, where failure to heed the words of God is attributed to a person or a community's inability or refusal to hear, end quote. Indonesian reciters acknowledge that those who recite well are many, whereas those who understand what they recite are few. But since God's word, particularly when executed well by a human vessel, is perfect, the charge of reception is the responsibility of the hearer, not the reciter. And perhaps this is why reception as performance is important, the reception that I was hoping to demonstrate with that first sound clip. Performative noise or noisy performance, when not overlooked or dismissed, has been theorized in various contexts as rebellion, disorder, even prophecy. At least 3 discourse communities, however, have overlooked Islamic sound in the Indonesian context. First are scholars and practitioners of Islam who have tended to dismiss Indonesian Islam as inauthentic in comparison to the Arab world or the Middle East. Second are Indonesianists who see Islamic forces as disruptive to the real Indonesia, characterized by the pre-Islamic layers of Hindu-Buddhist aesthetics, of elegant beauty, and the many courtly and regional arts that such cultural syncretisms have forged. Another discourse community to overlook the significance of Islamic sound is our multinational proponents of secular modernism, who see Indonesia's successful embrace of democracy and its modes of development as antithetical to the messy noisiness of the traditional Indonesian soundscape. I submit that government patronage of religious festivals and competitions is a function of both tolerance and control of the Islamic soundscape and what it might represent. In the Indonesian Islamic context, the performance of language and music embodies not only the power of persuasion, but also the temptation of elation, for all who produce and experience the sound. The festivalization of religion tempers this society teetering on the brink of religious ecstasy through national competitions with banks of judges, ranking criteria, and a point system. Here, feeling, emotion, interiority, reception, and participation are erased from the board, or at least fade into the background, and rather objective perfection is theoretically and practically privileged. And I have just a conclusion to bring back the presence of women, but I thought here might be a moment to show a couple of slides, to show a couple of video clips. So, and they're quite short. And let's see, I'm going to move this over here. There we go. And the only reason that says Morocco is because I prepared these clips for something I did in Morocco. They have nothing to do with Morocco, so I'm sorry, that is misleading. Somebody pointed that out to me. But, all right, I don't know if you managed to pick up a handout. We made these handouts here. If you have one, what I'd like to do is, these are very quickly edited phrases of Maria Ulfa reciting, and then we pan to the audience and so forth. But at the beginning, she addresses the crowd. And I think often we think of recitation as something, if we're not Muslim, that we don't really have access to. A reciter, their eyes are downcast, they're serious. One person asked me in a presentation, oh, they look like they're in pain. They have such a, look of huzn, of real passionate pain on their face. And so I just want to give Maria Ulfa a little agency as a person who is very well thought of throughout Southeast Asia. She's a dean, she is a judge, she's a judge of Qur'anic competitions. People fly their students in from all over the archipelago to train with her. And she travels the world, particularly during Ramadan. She's always on the road. And so I'm very, very honored that she has been really my primary consultant. So she says basically, I'm going to demonstrate various styles of reading from the 7 styles. We've just had the National Musabaqa Tilawat al-Qur'an, and I'm certain that all of you know about this, that there are 7 styles of reading. You women have already heard these styles of reading, but I will recite for you in all of these styles so you can hear them again. The hadith says, and she says this in Arabic also, the Qur'an came down in 7 dialects, so you have to choose the one that suits you. After the angel Gabriel came to Muhammad, the prophet was then required to teach the Qur'an to his companions, his sahabat, in a precise way so that there was no alteration to the word of God. This was part of his mission of da'wah, but it turned out that the da'wah is the Indonesian. For those of you Arabic speakers, it comes from da'wah. The hamza or ayn often turn into a K in Indonesian. But it turned out that it wasn't that easy. So at his next meeting with the angel Gabriel, Muhammad said, and here you'll hear her impersonating the voice of the prophet, "Angel, it turns out in my community, what I mean is that among my companions here, there are some that can and some that can't recite. Could you add some more models for reciting?" And so and then there's a little bit more that she says. So let's hear this. And then it will segue right into some... Yeah. Can we please have the volume up a little bit?
Sejarah turunnya Al-Quran. Pada saat itu Nabi menerima wahyu, undang-undangnya. Jadi anak-anak ibu misalnya mendengar.
So she's basically saying you have to understand that there's a science here, there's a system, and when you send your kids to learn Quranic recitation, this is very important. And now let's just hear a couple of her. You can hear them in the background. I would ask you to breathe with her. Just take a breath when she does, and don't let it out till she's done with her phrase. And we'll just see one more phrase because it pans to the audience so you can see where she is. Since the early days of its introduction to the archipelago, the Arabic language has represented and activated learning, knowledge, and power. When women are competent in the language of their religion, they have access to all three. Dorn Harder's work on the women of the two large Muslim organizations of Indonesia, Nahdlatul Ulama, NU, and Muhammadiyah, reveals the ways in which access to Qur'anic texts through both traditional education, usually in the context of the pesantren, and the modern methodology of ijtihad, has enabled women to discourse substantively on the issues that affect the control of women's intellects and physical bodies, from access to education and the workplace to polygamy and rape. She does not, however, address the door that is open to ecstatic states, to hearing as knowing, and to extra-linguistic communal and physical experience that may be facilitated by accessing religious texts. Letting Arabic live on the lips of Muslims in the world of William Graham allows Indonesians involved in the culture of recitation, whether they understand Arabic or not, to both feel the language and let others experience it. The roots of women's involvement not only in access to religious texts, but also in their interpretation and their presentation as lectures, lessons, recitations, and artistic performance are long. The power and beauty of these texts when recited or alluded to in song, as well as the mystery surrounding their sound, both their divine origin and human creation, ensures that the reception of such texts occurs on the cognitive level of the mind, the emotional level of the heart, and the spiritual level of the soul. That women in Indonesia are so prominent as reciters, particularly when compared to their numbers elsewhere, may be a function of their talent for sounding the divine while being controlled, or at the very least contained, by the patriarchal institutions of society and state. We'll end with 3 more images here of just women in teaching contexts. Thank you very much.
Now I'll start this with an apology that I'm speaking about a topic that I'd worked on years ago. If you heard my bio that Martin just read, you see a bit of an odyssey through various subjects. But there was a time when I was working as somebody studying Turks and the culture of Turkic peoples. I was working on Central Asian cultures, and I had done extensive work on oral epical recitation. And for Turkic peoples, the epic was the central poetic and musical genre. This originally was connected with a shamanistic culture, and over time, as Turkic people spread to the Middle East, it was transformed in various ways. But the people we're talking about now are Kazakhs. Hey, that's you found it. Great. Okay. The Kazakhs live in what used to be called Dashti Kivchak, to say this huge steppe where the northern Turkic people had lived. If you look at the map, it's a very huge place, and many of the Turkic-speaking people that we know in the world today had come through that territory at one time or another. My work is really a partnership with the real Kazakh scholar, Professor Alma Kunenbay, who had been in the Ethnographic Museum in Petersburg and is currently in Stanford. She is a serious scholar of the Kazakh epic, and I had been inviting her to the States since 1989. I was in contact with her since '88. And in '91, she led me on an ethnographic expedition to the southwestern part of Kazakhstan, in the region of Kızılar'da near the Sir Darya, the Sir River, which is unlike much of Kazakhstan, which has a very mixed population with a great many non-Kazakhs, especially Russians. This part of the country is pretty Kazakh. You don't really see very many non-Kazakhs there. And the custom of the epic recitation is still rather strong. I'll just read something about what Alma says about the genre of epic. She writes in the Garland Encyclopedia of World Music that the living epic tradition is not limited to heroic epic. Surrounding the epic tale, which is called zhyrau, is a large group of narrative songs and instrumental genres which at first glance seem unrelated. There are a number of names here for these genres: termet, zhyrau, osiet. These consist mainly of short songs without a narrative plot, philosophical homilies on life and death, or on the place and purpose of human beings. So as you can see, this genre comes to the center of the philosophical worldview of the nomadic Turkic peoples. Now, there's two issues here which are quite controversial, and I won't be able to solve them here. One is the period in which the Kazakhs became Muslims, and what that means, in fact, because through most of their culture, the essential performance and poetic genres did not change fundamentally. So the main thing that changed was the shamanic figure was replaced by an epic bard figure, because he was now sharing the stage with an Islamic figure, a mullah. But the status of this epic reciter was still very, very high. The second issue is the role of women in this whole complex. And I've had extensive conversations with Professor Kunanbay, and this is a rather mysterious topic, because on the one hand, it's known that there had been female reciters in the past, and we interviewed people who had relatives who had still been epic reciters. But their recitation was within a much, let's say, was less open than the male reciters, who often had a much wider audience. In the past, it's known that male epic reciters had been advisors of the political rulers, of the khans and sultans, which women, as far as we know, was not open to them. But the transmission of the epic recitation often went through the female line, as well as the male, although the male would be the more public figure. In the last generation, there was one woman who was a public reciter in the Soviet sense, because now we have to deal with the reality of Kazakhstan within the Soviet system, which had a very mixed view of the epic reciter, since he or she was representative of the spiritual core of the Kazakh culture. During Stalin's time, let's say the most unfavored kind of performer was the shamanistic kobuz player, the shamanistic player of the bowed fiddle. And this kind of performer was often simply eliminated. And that's why the kobuz performance, which was the most shamanistic performance, doesn't exist anymore. There is a revived kind of kobuz performance in the conservatory in Almaty, but it's not a direct transmission because most of the performers were executed. The performers of the zhyrau, of the epic, seem to have fared somewhat better. So in the southwest part of the country, we still have lineages going back to the 19th century of epic reciters. Now, I can't even begin to answer the questions you might have about the role of women because the issue was quite unclear. We know that the woman we call Shamshad Apa, who I met when I was there in '91, was the first woman in the Soviet period to be on a stage as an epic reciter. And the lady you're going to see now, Uljan Baybasanova, was her student. And today, Uljan is certainly the most prominent female performer of the zhyrau in Kazakhstan. Uljan was also the student of Almas Almatov, who is he's a very great epic reciter, a male epic reciter from the same area. You should understand also that this is essentially an esoteric tradition in the sense that the calling to become an epic reciter involves animal patrons and dreams from these patrons. And one enters this profession often with great difficulty, and there's a complex negotiations between one's family and the community as to how one enters, whether one enters, or whether one's allowed to leave. And actually, I heard some rather let's say, frightening stories of the fate of people who left the profession when the community felt they shouldn't have. I'll show you now a bit of a sort of a kind of quasi-documentary that's done in Central Asia. It's under the auspices of the Aga Khan Initiative for the Music of Central Asia. And in this segment, it's called Bardic Divas, which is about female performers in various genres in the Central Asian area. There is an interview with Uljan, done very recently, just a couple of years ago. She's sitting outside the tomb of Korkut Ata. Korkut Ata is the legendary founder of music and poetry, as we think, as a legendary founder. Those who are familiar with Turkish culture will know the name Korkut is the name of the national epic of the Oghuz Turks called Korkut Dede. This was a sacred site to the Oghuz, Turkmens, before the Kazakhs came here. When the Kazakhs vanquished them and pushed them further south into Iran, the Kazakhs maintained this as a sacred site. The Soviets destroyed the tomb back in the 1920s. It was only rebuilt in the 1980s, and I was there with Alma Kunanbay in 1991. And now we see Uljan, who was then a student, will be speaking in front of the tomb, talking about her view of the role of the epic singer. So let's see if we can take a look at this just for a moment. Okay, now we found it. Okay, can we dim lights, perhaps? Can we dim lights?
Мендегі айтып жүрген жыр бұл менің ата-бабаларым келе жатырған көне дәстүр. Бұл дәстүр үйреніп айту мүмкін емес. Бұл дәстүр адамның қанында, адамның бойында болу керек. Менің ұстазым болды. Мен ол кісіні сол есімді 4-5 жастан бастап сол жыраудың айтуында үйрене бастадым. 9 жасымнан бастап мен өзім домбыраны алып қолыма айта бастадым. Рухты, күшті жырды айту үшін. Құдай одан кейін әруақтар ата-бабалардың әруағын беріп тұрады. Қорқыт 3 ханға уәзір болған. Бұл бірінші атқарған функциясы жыраудың. Екінші, жырау батырлармен өткені, батырлармен бірге, олармен еріп соғысқа даттанған. Оларға рухын көтеріп жыр айтқан, мадақтаған, мақтаған, әруақ шақырған. Үшінші функциясы жыраудың бүкіл халыққа ақыл өсиет айтқан. Төртінші, жырау ұзақ жырларды, дастандарды, тарихи жырларды келешек ұрпаққа жеткізуші. Жыраулар осындай халық арасында осындай ұстаздық қасиет атқарған.
How do we shut it? Thank you. Okay. So this is a bastel which is actually several generations old, from the teacher of one of her teachers, Jianbai. Open my heart, overflow, stretch my tongue, stretch and grow. Let's see now. O my heart, rush not nor stumble, amidst the clamoring throng be not bewildered. You've told my horse to ride straight on, and my heart you've raised on high. So people, let me touch your heart, and sweet mare's milk may I let you drink. O my red tongue, be not afraid, this is your day to speak and stretch.
Sonda da telem söyleşe, tölek men arılday şalıqta telem şalıqta oy şırın janның sawında oye söylep telem söylep qal ayt degende kerildi oy degen sözge tаңылмай üstün tөгіп ayt bir-birine ulasқан дайгатен шаңында oye şaman gelise şalqıp söyle qubulup soqqan davulday azda bolsa tilim tәтті iskinlebe qavunda oye sözdün beri tanmalı qoraдағы өзіңнің ен таңба салған малыңда oye жиналып келген ағыным аяма шорған
Now she's singing with the heroic voice of the heroic epic. The Kazakhs have an entirely different style of singing for lyrical songs that talk about love and human and feelings of that kind. This is the voice for the epic. They call this the kobuz dıbısı, the voice of the kobuz, of the with the harmonic sounds of the old shamanistic bowed instrument, which both the men and the male and female bards use. Her female teacher, Uljan's female teacher, was Shamsad Apa, who passed away just a few years ago. And Alma had recorded Shamsad Apa at a studio in Petersburg, singing a very beautiful, I think a very beautiful terme, which is about the value of friendship. And again, as Alma mentions, as Professor Kunabai mentions, the genre surrounding the epic dealt with all areas of human life and morality. And they did this, and in a sense, the Kazakhs had developed a kind of indigenous humanism in which the values of actions are determined by their relation to human society. If there are any non-human figures, they're the figures of animals who are used as moral exemplars for different kinds of human behavior. So here, in this terme, dost yüreği yavşa ayna, your friend's heart is a round mirror. Your friend's heart is a round mirror. Would it heed those who slander you? Don't take it roughly and break it. Don't soil it. Would that be right? If the round mirror becomes scratched, spots will fall upon its face. Take care, my dear, take care. Your friend's heart is a honey-sweet spring. It draws your glance by its sparkling. A secret lies within its gurgling. Don't spit in it. When you come to it exhausted, it will quench your thirst like the river of paradise. Your friend's heart is a dombra. Beat on its strings, twist 1,000 times, satisfy your ear's thirst. Play on it as though you would smash it. Don't let it stare at you like a piece of wood. But be sure not to break it. Be sure. Take care, my heart. Take care, my dear. Take care.
Sandara
yürek ay dombra diyemen tapmamura kulaktan vuruşun sandıra sandıra deydir sandıra Elşiğin tahtay bulmasın sandıra kurmeye sandıra oynamay oynamay boş yürek ay kendala
Shamsadapa. Back in 1991, we had gone to the Karmaksha settlement near Kızıldağ to attend a commemoration for a zhyrau, a bard who had passed away recently. And this was a place where many of the students, some of the well-known bards and some of the young aspiring bards, spent a whole evening, really until close to dawn, singing terme, singing these moral didactic songs that were connected with epic. So as you can see, there were many dombra players and many zhyrau and zhyrau students. And I want to play a little bit of the youngest student. Unfortunately, she was 9 years old, so, and I've talked to Alma recently. We don't actually know who she was, and I'd like to find out what she's up to now. She was the youngest in this group. Again, the purpose of the evening was to commemorate this zhyrau, Koanduk, who had just passed away a few months earlier. She was the youngest performer. And I remember I wrote at the time, let's say, yeah. The dombra she used was a plain factory-made instrument, which was small enough for her hands. She struck the strings and commenced to sing the same tune that the man had sung earlier, but her voice, while betraying some fear, was strong and passionate. She struck the dombra with the wild, driving, yet uneven stroke used by the male bards. Even when she missed a beat, her voice continued boldly, never breaking her stride. If anything, her lapses made her more confident. Her next notes were always stronger, as though to overcome any fear she had felt. So I was in awe of the self-possession of this little bard. And among the songs, she says, "We are the bards of Karmaksha, we are the swans following the way of Korkut Baba." I was in awe of the self-possession of this littlest bard, this baby falcon, this winged horse flying over the steppes of Karmaksha. So I'll try to locate her for you. And you'll notice that in this music, she's beating out she's beating out a rhythm which is in 9 beats, but she doesn't feel she has to keep to it all the time. And this is not actually a mistake. That the Kazakhs have many of the rhythms that those of us who know Turkish music will be familiar with from Turkish folk music, but a bard is free to change the rhythm with the rhythm of his words. And this is a great skill which this little girl is just in the process of learning. So let's try.
Жалғандығым жығылды, қайта құру өрістеп, қайта алдым, қайта тоғырды, тоғыр емей-емейне, ашық айттың сырымды, жабылған жала алынып, оқыдым жаңа жырымды, жолына түстің ағадал, бабалардың бұрынғы, сырдың бойы біледі, жұта сырдай қаланы. Шетелден қонақ келсе де, іздейді қорқыт бабаны, еседі майды күн сайын, достықтың жолы самалы, халқын сүйген ол қызы, отаныма бағалы, аталы сөздің шебері, ақылдың алтын кемері, сан түрлі сәнді өнері, өлеңнің аққан көзері. Бұлбұл менен дүлдүлдің бағы боп жанған сірелі, төрт түлігін ойнатып, мал өсірген осы өлкем, ақ күрешін жайқалтып, дән өсірген осы өлкем. Қазақтың тұзын барынша жақтап та келген осы өлке. Құрмет тұтат халықта сүлейлер сүйген даласын, тосып жатыр алыптай қуаң мен сырдың арасын. Талауын жесең бармақтай жадырап жаның тұрасын, торлама тәтті қауынын таңданып барып жарасын. Ұлдарын көрсем жалындап кесек-кесек сөйлейді, батырма деп қаласын. Қыздарын көрсем қыпша бер үлкеннің өтпес алдынан, менің жарым болса деп тәңірден тілеп шығасын. Жыраулығын қазақтың мақтанда қылған осы өлкем, досымызға ерлерді аттандырғанда осы өлкем, пересвелі аттанған қасымдай туған осы өлкем. Кешегі соғыс кезінде тәйімбеттей батырдың жасындай болған осы өлкем, сырда туған абайдай тұрмаған бет туған жер. Жыраулықтың маршалы жиенбай базар ешіне аз жыр менен белін туған жер. Жүз шайырдың даусынан сусыны халық таныған жер, балымшадай сұлуға мұзарап әнін салған жер. Рүстембек оңғар көшені таңғалтып топты жарыған жер, молда Ахмет Тасберген дауысы көкті жарыған жер. Тоған астайлақ қыстауға ел қорғауға шығарады бабадан бата алған жер. Қармақшы біздің осындай ырыс пен дәулет, қонған жері
Well, I'll just close by a remark that I heard from Shemshad Appa, the female zhyrau, who was the teacher there of many of the women. We were in a car passing through over the steppe, and I noticed a statue, a large statue of a falcon in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the steppe. And I turned to her and asked, why is that statue there? And she said, because we are falcons. So.
Question for Anne. Probably quite uninformed, but you know, the Quran began, of course, as a oral recitation, and eventually it was written, canonized in a variety of ways. I mean, in 7 canonical recensions, of course. How far does the actual tajweed that we hear today, how far does it go back? To me, it sounds, I mean, do we have evidence for that? Do we have evidence that in early times, whatever, Umayyad, Abbasid, the time of the Prophet, that the Quran was actually recited with this kind of form of tajweed?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely asking the wrong person. But it's a fabulous question. And, you know, I mean, that was one of the real conundrums, I think, doing research, was one, continuing to ask myself, like, do they do it like this in Egypt? Is this, you know, how right is this? How Arab is this, and so forth? Or how historically correct is this? One of the things that, you know, that I think ethnographic work reveals is that people, it's right because people think it's so. And when people are constantly citing this kind of this doctrine and this dogma and saying, you know, recite the Quran with Arabic melodies, or beautify the Quran with your voice, and then also spending enormous amounts of time to teaching these rules of tajweed as they are handed down, and then, of course, being able to participate in this international system where there are Turkish reciters, there are Bosnian reciters, there are reciters from South Africa, who frankly can sound quite different in many ways, but to be able to judge according to these criteria. Now, you know, the idea is that it's an archetypal recitation that has been handed down in an unbroken chain since, you know, since this moment when Gabriel came down to the Prophet Muhammad and then later on. and that's what is believed, and that's what is believed. But I'll find you a Quranic scholar to ask, what kind of evidence we have from various points in time. But it's an excellent question.
Actually, if I can step in for
Please.
a moment, that, of course, for such early periods, I mean, as an art historian, you have different kinds of evidence than ethnomusicologists have. But at least there's a strong suggestion by Ottoman times that there's a connection between tajweed and taqsim. Because taqsim emerges in Istanbul first. The term is used musically at a time when the ulama were becoming very important proponents of secular music and secular singing. And it's a thesis that I have, that there's this connection, and that the use of modulation and certain features of rhythm probably connect the two. Because one of the features of taqsim playing, as we know it, is that it does, unlike Persian music, it doesn't adhere to the rhythmic cadences of poetry. It's something that's much closer to the idea of a prose text, which with links, because the Quran is a prose text, and this links tajweed and taqsim. But it's a deep subject that we can't come to the bottom of.
So then explain what taqsim is. Just
sorry. To the improvisation that the term is an Arabic term, but it's used musically first in Turkey, in the beginning of the end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th century, and it's meant to be when it's defined musically in Ottoman texts, it's meant to be improvised. To say it's performance generated. It cannot be based on a predetermined melody, just like the tajweed, which cannot be based on a predetermined melody, and it has to be free of any rhythmic cycle. Those are the two. And three, it has to modulate. It cannot stay in one maqam. And that's how taqsim is defined already in the 17th century in Turkish. And of course, it's still a very living tradition. What we don't understand is the relation between the Turkish development of taqsim and the Arab development, because we find this kind of taqsim only among Ottoman Arabs. When non-Ottoman Arabs play this, we know they've learned it from Ottoman Arabs relatively recently. So it would seem to be an Ottoman feature, but what interaction there was between Syria, Egypt, and Istanbul at, say, in the 17th century, we just have no sources for that.
So for my mediocre question, listening to the first recording of the Kazakh singer, it sounded a little bit, it reminded me of a cante jondo, some flamenco. So there was something a little bit of a gypsy. Was there? No?
Well, you heard it, but I mean, there's no...
My question, I mean, because that was not the question. My question is, what was the migratory path of, the people who left India and eventually ended up in...
They never got near there.
Okay.
No. What I think you may be responding to is the quality of voice, that hard quality that gypsy singers use in Spain in the cante jondo. But that's the first time anybody has ever said that, actually, in connection with Kazakh singing. So it's original. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This question is for Anne. It seems to me that both reciters, the female and male, followed one particular style of chanting the Quran, and that is of Abdul Basit, Abdul Samad.
Mm-hmm.
Do they mention him? And the next question is, have any of the women reciters visited anywhere in the Arab world? Mm-hmm. And what was the reaction of Arab Muslims for that? Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Well, good. I gave Majid a copy of my book, and I keep threatening him to read it. But actually, those are great questions because I think I can answer them. Absolutely. Sheikh Abdul Basit and all of the great reciters from Egypt are very important. In fact, what's interesting is that we were talking about this earlier, before the age of a sort of steamship travel, or before Indonesian independence, say the mid 20th century, Indonesia got independence in 1945. But before that, either local melodies were used or things that people learned from sea traders, so perhaps much more from the Hadramaut and from this area, and then also from Mecca. People went to Saudi Arabia to Mecca to study, and they often stayed there for 20 years or so. So there's a whole kind of canon of lagu Makawi, or Meccan melodies. With radio transmission, we have more recitation being broadcast from Cairo specifically. So I have people who say, you know, even before the Egyptian reciters started coming here, I learned how to recite by listening to shortwave radio all night long. Yusnar Yusuf, the guy that you saw as a judge, he told me that, and he's probably just a little bit older than I am, however old that is. And but then following independence, Indonesia did a lot more exchange with particularly Egypt, which of course is, you know, I shouldn't say of course, but really radiates so much mediated culture, including the great reciters. So these reciters came to Indonesia, and their styles were literally canonized, institutionalized in these institutes, like I showed a slide of the Institute Ilm al-Quran. There's the one gentleman that I showed at the very beginning, he said when he used to drive this reciter to the airport, he was telling me how important Maqam Bayati was. And he said, you know, all the maqamat are important, but this guy, he would go from my house and recite all the way until we got to the airport, and he still wasn't done with Maqam Bayati. So they have these real, you know, stories of being among these reciters. As for Indonesians going over there, there's been a long history of Indonesians studying at Al-Azhar University in Cairo for recitation and all kinds of learning, you know, predating this culture of religious festivals and so forth. And of course, you know, religious delegations were always coming in, even in the short time that I was doing my research there. And according to you know, the reciters that I worked with in Indonesia, they'd say, yeah, the Egyptians are always amazed, you know, our Arabic is so good, but we can't really speak it. And it's not really, they actually do study, but since they don't use it to, you know, do their marketing and so forth. And again, you know, the idea of reciters who recite well but understand everything are few. Many reciters do study, and most many Indonesian Qurans will have the Arabic in the middle and then, you know, the English translation on the side. People who can go back and forth and are completely fluent in Arabic as a spoken language are much more rare, but they always say the Indonesians are just blown away that their Arabic and recitation is so good, but they can't really have a conversation at dinner, so except for some, you know, kind of basic stuff.
All right. Well, one of the things that music regularly does is alter our perception of time. And apparently lectures do too. I've just been told that we're about to be kicked out of the building. We've gone so long, so we'll have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid. We will fold out, and there's drinks and eats in the lobby, so please continue. If you have questions, bank them and accost our two presenters outside. Thank you so much for coming, and thank the two of you for a wonderful presentation.